for the first substantial period over 20 years, it was safe to go to the continent. They went with Lord Byron and Polidori and others, and they spent some time in France and Switzerland, and there was some unseasonably inclement weather there in Switzerland, and that's when Mary Shelley, she wrote Frankenstein during a competition to write ghost stories. They passed by Frankenstein Castle in Germany, where she got the idea, means Frank's stone, the Franks being the ancient people of France. There's this area of Germany called Franconia, you see. Now, Shelley, he preferred Mary Godwin because she was more cerebral, whereas Harriet Westbrook was a bit flighty, shallow, not as intellectual as he was. So the relationship pulled, they didn't have that much to talk about. And one of their babies had died. But anyway, before long, his mistress was pregnant with his child. So anyway, his wife, Harriet Westbrook, she was back here in London. The creditors were hammering on the door. She was penniless, distraught, trying to feed her child. Her husband had abandoned her. She had no prospects. So she thought, well, if my husband's going to have an affair, so am I. So she began a romantic liaison with an army officer who was considerably older than herself. But then she had to move from one flat to another because she couldn't afford the rent. But she went back to her old landlady, who refused to forward her paramour's letters. So she felt she'd been jilted by this army officer. She couldn't face it anymore. So she threw herself into the Serpentine and drowned. She committed suicide at that Serpentine, that pond in Hyde Park. Well, Shelley heard the news. Now, a marvellous poet he was, but in his personal life, many people say he was an absolute rat. And he reacted with complete indifference to the death of the mother of his first two children. I'm not sure what happened to his first child, his daughter, by her. He had a son called Yolanthe. Anyhow, so he's free to marry Harriet Westbrook, which he did. He went on to have another child with her, not Harriet Westbrook, sorry, Mary Godwin, who became Mary Shelley. That's what was known as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She wrote that when she was 18. But why were they so much more productive in literary terms back then? Because they didn't have to do exams, which is such a dampener on literary creativity. Anyway, so they returned to this country and they lived here on and off, and he knew everyone who was anyone in literary circles back then, like Robert Southey, Lord Byron, Thackeray wasn't alive yet. Who am I thinking of? William Taylor Coleridge, and I'm trying to think of the other guy who went to Christ's Hospital, who was born to American parents. It'll come to me. The one who wrote Juvenilia. Okay, got a bit of a mental block on that one. But anyway, finally they went to Italy again. They were travelling there in 1822. Good friends with John Keats, and John Keats died in Rome. Shelley was deeply upset about the loss of his 25-year-old friend, and composed a sonnet on his grave at the Protestant graveyard in Rome. So then they're at Livorno, or Leghorn as we sometimes call it, off the coast of Italy. He was on a boat with some others in 1822 when the boat capsized and Shelley drowned. Now it seems that they were rammed by another boat accidentally, or was it deliberate in an attempt to steal from them? So he drowned, the others survived, and then his body was cremated on the beach. I'm not quite sure why. There was some sort of regulation. It had to be cremated, it couldn't be buried. It seems odd to me, what's wrong with burying it in a normal manner? There was nothing particularly dangerous or unhygienic about his cadaver, and the women stayed in the coach, the horse-drawn coach. I'm not sure why they didn't attend, maybe just because they were pregnant, somehow this would affect their unborn infant. And then the ashes are interred, I think, in the Protestant graveyard in Rome as well, if I got that right. So he's an absolute outcast. He was a sort of damnatio memoriae at Oxford University at the time. But decades later, this splendid white marble memorial to him was erected at Univ, his old college that had sent him down. So he very much achieved rehabilitation. That was him, and he had some children who live on his descendants even to this day, and Mary Shelley lived on into the 1850s. Well, that's just a little bit about Percy Bysshe Shelley. There's another house of his in the King's Cross area where there's a blue plaque. I can't think of any other addresses that him still stand. The school he went to in Zion Lane doesn't exist. There's Eton. I think there's Poet Walk, a little spit of land on some backwater that exists where he used to go and daydream, while away the hours. He used to go rowing informally, not competitively, when he was a schoolboy. So he's someone who's fascinated me since my earliest boyhood, since Mr. Black first read Ozymandias to the class when I was 8. And I've seen an upper school at Eton where he carved his name into the oaken panel, and I've traced my digit where his must have touched as he wrote his name in there, because boys of third generation are more able to write their name on that wooden panel. I'm not sure if that rule applied back then, because I don't think it was the third generation at Eton, though I could be mistaken. Okay, that's enough from me. So please follow me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and book online lessons with me in English literature and politics, history, religious studies, English as a foreign language, French and law. and follow me on all those things. Subscribe, choose me as your tour guide in Londinium. I've got a couple of other channels linked to this one, British Poesy or indeed English Law. Toodle pip.